Welcome to another episode of United for a Healthy Stoughton. My name is Stephanie Patton and I'm the prevention coordinator for the town. I work at the Youth Commission. And today our focus for our show is a youth health update. We're going to talk actually about all of the amazing data we collected from our youth health survey. And so I have with me today our evaluator, Kendall Bennett. And she's going to help share our some of our findings from our survey. We're going to try to explain them in plain English for the viewers at home. So I'm very excited to have Kendall with me. She's probably the only other person in Stoughton who is as excited about this data set as I am. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about some of our information. So every other year, the OASIS Coalition works with the Stoughton Public Schools to survey all of our 6th through 12th graders in order to look at some of their health behaviors and attitudes. And we're really fortunate that the district allows us to do this, and we learn a lot about our students. So it's really great for us to be able to have this partnership. This year, we did all of our surveying on February 12th, and we surveyed both the high school and the middle school. At the middle school, we used an electronic survey method. So we actually used SurveyMonkey, and the kids sat down with their little devices and they all took the survey anonymously. At the high school, we use a booklet. It's with pencil and paper and bubble sheets, and so it's actually all embedded. They have the question in the bubble, and they do it that way. We ship it off to Scantron. We have the surveys scanned, and then all of that data comes back to Kendall, and she cleans it up and turns it into things that we can use and that make sense for our students and for us. So we're going to talk about what we found in those surveys. So again, I want to make sure I thank all of the teachers and the administration at the high school and the middle school, because it does take a full class period to collect that information, and then we make sure we work with the district to use all of that information. So I meet with the principals. I met with school committee last week. So for those of you who watch school committee, you also have seen a similar presentation to this there as well. And if you're interested, that's a great place to go. And a lot of this data, this presentation, something similar to it, is available on the OASIS website as well for people who want to sort of look more carefully at home. So let's talk a little bit about why we trust our data and what we do to make sure this is like really high quality data.
I think that's what makes the magic of the evaluator, is that being able to send the data to someone who is not directly affiliated is really important, so they can look at it with some fresh eyes. And so basically, this also speaks to the anonymous piece too, is that I just get a giant spreadsheet of ones and zeros and twos and threes, and then we use that to make meaning out of that data. We clean it up. And by clean it up, I mean, we have a couple different measures that we use. We ask the youth that filled out the survey if they were honest when they were taking their survey. And there are a couple other little inconsistencies and things that we look for just to make sure that, if somebody was feeling like they didn't want to be honest, that they just don't get included in the final sample. Or if maybe they made mistakes and they selected 2 bubbles instead of just 1 bubble, we can sort of just remove that question. Or so there's a lot of different things we could do to make sure that we end up with a really clean sample. And now, thankfully, I've had a lot of practice, so I can really tell when things look right and look wrong. And, and I think you have a couple slides to show how consistent it looks over time, so we sort of feel really confident that we end up with a good sample.
Yep, so we can even look at that as an example. So in 2015, we actually compared some of our data set to other schools, and we looked at, this is 30-day alcohol use, so because everybody often will say, like, everybody lies on the survey. We hear that a lot.
All the time.
Yeah, and we actually think our students are pretty honest with us, because we feel like we try to set that up to give them that opportunity. But I think this slide is kind of interesting because it shows 6 random schools. One of them is Stoughton. I actually don't even know which color we are. But for me, it sort of illustrates that if students were really lying on the survey, that our data probably wouldn't look so similar to other high schools unless there's a really big, elaborate conspiracy theory between districts.
Right.
And so it looks the same too when this is the marijuana data. You almost can't even tell that I changed the slide.
Yeah, you can.
But just that, the data sort of overlaps and looks the same. The other thing we always do is I always go and try to do faculty meetings ahead of time and talk to teachers about how do we make sure that students really feel in their classrooms when they're taking the survey that Nobody's looking over their shoulder. We really are not trying to identify individual students. We just want to know what's happening kind of at that grade level, at the district level, like, you know, what's happening with that whole population, as opposed to trying to figure out who you are, what you were doing. There's no real way for us to do that, even if we wanted to.
Couldn't if you wanted to.
Right. So, you know, we really try, and we want to make sure students really feel that way when they're taking the survey, so they can be as honest as possible.
Right, because the information that you get back from the survey is so valuable. You would never want to jeopardize the trust that the students have when they're giving you this information, because they really are doing a service to their community by sharing really how they feel about these questions, because it really helps everyone be healthier when you're able to respond based on the data.
Yep. And we also make sure that parents have the option to opt their student out if they're uncomfortable with the survey taking. So that happens at both the high school and middle school level. And students also have the option to not have to take the survey that day if they just feel like it's not for them, or skip questions that they are uncomfortable with or don't understand. So sometimes we see some of that as well. So when we think about data, we talk about hope and concern, and how in our data set we see a lot of things that are hopeful. Most of our students are making really good choices. And then we see some things that are concerning. So particularly around, you know, when we see behaviors related to substance use, or some of our data around depression or other health issues that we have concerns about that, and we think about and work with the district about ways we can address some of these concerns as a community. But by and large, our students are making really, really great choices, and so we want to continue to remember that and to celebrate that, because sometimes we get caught up in the negative part, but that we can kind of hold those two things together as we think about what we're learning, because of course you can always flip statistics, and so we know
we can twist it any way we want.
That's right. So we always like to start with protective factors. So these are things that help buffer our students and kind of keep them resilient. And we know that at home, a lot of really great things are happening. Students are reporting that most of them feel like they can talk to their parents, that their parents notice and tell them when they're doing a good job, which is also really important, validating those positive things that your student is doing. Students believe that their parents would know if they came home on time, so they feel like somebody is paying attention to what's going on and keeping track of them. So that is important, setting those standards and expectations and keeping them. We ask students if they believe that their parent checks in with other parents, if they're going to be at some sort of a party gathering, sleepover. It happens more frequently at the middle school level than at the high school level, but still the majority of students say their parent does that. So I think sometimes parents think other parents don't check, but they do, and you should. It's a good thing to do. And that most students also believe that their parents are talking to them about drugs and alcohol, and that's also really, really important for families to be doing. And when we see our alcohol data, we know that there's a relationship often between what the parent expresses about drugs and alcohol and what the student does.
And the more explicit, the better.
That's right. Yeah, be very clear. We want them to be really clear. So that is really good. So we're going to look at a couple of our slides related to alcohol and other drug use here at the middle school and the high school. So I don't know, Kendall, you want to talk about what a few of these mean?
Yeah, definitely. So lifetime substance use, basically the way we ask this question is, all of these questions, or nearly all of these questions, come from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is developed by the CDC and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So they're all validated and tested, and the way they're asked is just perfect for getting the information that they're supposed to be getting. So we're not just making these questions up.
Right.
But so this is people who have ever tried these things in their lifetime. So for alcohol, I think it's more than just a sip, right? It has to be like a whole drink or something.
Yep.
E-cigarettes, that's a newer one. Obviously, it's not something that we asked about a whole lot a long time ago. But we definitely see that as a big prevailing trend that we're seeing. The marijuana rates, and this is the middle school data, are low, which is fantastic. Cigarette rates, that's like one of the, maybe besides the seatbelt, is one of the best public health successes over the past couple decades.
Yep.
And then prescription drugs, which tend to be, in my experience, tend to be a little higher at the middle school level. And that actually in my personal opinion,
a funky question.
Yeah,
right?
we think the way the question is asked is a little complicated, and your understanding of what a prescription drug is might not totally be there. So we tend to see that number drop at the high school level, which is kind of interesting.
Yep.
But we think it comes with a little bit of a better understanding.
Right. So we're thinking that our rate for prescription drug use at the middle school is probably, prescription drug misuse is probably not quite even 3%.
Right.
But it's because kids are including other kinds of things. The question is confusing to them.
And occasionally we get to include an open response at
Right.
the middle school because it's an electronic survey. So, sometimes we'll get is Tylenol a prescription drug? I'm not totally
Right.
sure. And so we sort of have a little inkling.
Yep, right. And then this is our high school data for, and we can compare this to the state, but the state data has a little lag time. So we actually probably will not see 2019 data from the state until we survey again in 2021.
I think we just got 2017
we did,
a couple months ago. So.
Yes. Yep. So do you want to talk a little bit about this one as well? And
yeah, so generally we're lower than the state in most things, especially with cigarettes and prescription drug use at the high school. That's so fantastic, something to really be celebrated. And the town has clearly put so many resources into making sure that our young people are staying safe from alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. So I think that's awesome. We see ourselves quite a bit lower on alcohol as well, and a little bit lower on marijuana. E-cigarette usage is a little higher, but that one, especially just because the trend has been moving so quickly, and e-cigarette usage has been increasing so quickly that we think because the data is older for Massachusetts, it's the 2017 data and newer for us, that might be why our rate is a little bit higher. The other drugs that are on that list are a little bit more, they've been around, they're not really trending too hard in one direction or the other, not anything like e-cigarettes. It's understandable that one's a little bit peaked, but still definitely one of those areas that would fall into the concern bucket. But I think a lot of things that would fall into the hope bucket on here.
Yeah. In most cases, most students continue to make good choices, even when we look at those lifetime rates. So that's really good news. But we certainly are paying very close attention to that e-cigarette number because it has been changing rapidly, but not just in Stoughton, in the state and in the nation as well. So we've done other shows about this where we've talked about the strategies that we have in place in Stoughton that we are really using at all different levels to try to address this issue. And we actually have an event coming up for parents around vaping, which will be at the middle school. So.
And it's important to note that includes all electronic vapor products, so Juuls, I don't know all the other lingo, but we make it clear that it includes all electronic vapor products.
And I think the question is a cleaner question this time than we asked 2 years ago, so we didn't actually use the word Juul when we asked 2 years ago, and we heard some feedback that some students actually didn't report that they were using electronic cigarettes because they didn't realize that juuling was the same thing. And so I think there's been a lot more education since that time and clarification, and the question was clarified. So that also could impact our use rates. It might look like more students are using because we're getting a more accurate picture, right? So this next slide is about our 30-day use rates. So 30-day use really is more of a snapshot of students who are kind of more currently, we talk about current use of alcohol and other drugs. This chart shows trends, sort of the snapshot from like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. We like to look at these numbers. I use this graph to actually try to pinpoint where the giant jumps in use happen because those are important intervention points for prevention. And so, this gives us a lot of information where we think about between 8th and 9th grade, there's a big jump in use typically, and then between 9th and 10th, we know transitions, 8th grade to 9th grade can be a time that can be risky for students, and more experimentation might happen in 9th grade. And I don't totally understand the 9th to 10th grade phenomenon, although we see that regularly. So
I think it's probably like, it's probably left over from that transition time, right? So it's like you wouldn't necessarily capture everybody in the first year you survey them again. So I think it's sort of, I think it sort of drags on for a longer time.
And we think about 10th graders have more access to older students maybe who might
more
be
freedom,
using different things. So lots of things
someone with a car.
Right. This is trend data over the years. So this is like giving us a sense for where we've come from in the last now 12 years. Actually, this chart is getting to be so long, we used to even include 2005, but it's like it fell off the chart because we have so many years of data, which is awesome.
I'm always proud that I took the first youth risk behavior survey back in high school at Stoughton High. So.
Yep, which is awesome. And so the good news here, this is our middle school data, 30-day use rates. Our data really is trending down pretty much across the board if we look at sort of the big picture, with the exception of electronic cigarettes, which we know is sort of a new substance here. So that is really good news. And then the same really can be true for we look at our high school data, our trend data. And our numbers really are generally looking really good, except for that green line with electronic cigarettes. And again, we know that sort of falls in line with what's happening in the state. And we're paying very close attention to that, along with the other things that we're looking at. So,
and really important to keep your eye on the marijuana number too, with the change in laws and policies.
Right.
So that's something we definitely want to keep our eye on and not let that get away from us either.
And that's sort of indicative of like all this data is so important to us because it does give us a snapshot every 2 years of what's happening with our student body and where we can look at, are new things emerging that we didn't see before? What's happening? What's happening kind of in the state and in the nation around some of these issues, and what are students thinking about? We like to look at the gap between what students are actually doing and their perception. So there's a lot of research around misperceptions of use, and when we see really big gaps between what students think most of their peers are doing, which is those blue bars, and what's actually happening, it actually presents a risk for them in terms of use. So we really want to be thinking about how do we reduce the gap between, and the way we want to reduce the gap is by reducing misperceptions. We don't want the orange bars to go up,
right.
But we want to think about how do we talk to students about the actual really low rates of substance use among their peers. And one of the things we'll be rolling out in the fall, hopefully, is a media campaign around some of these truthful numbers so that we can try to start seeing those blue bars go down, because we know the research says that when that happens, the use rates will follow, actually. So.
And I think a lot of it is that that perceived peer pressure, right? So even if they're not being directly pressured, they're perceiving that their peers are doing it, and to be normal and to fit in, this is what you have to do. But we want to communicate what is normal, and what is normal is actually not using.
That's right.
So try to sort of lifting that weight off of young people to not feel like, they have to do something to fit in. They actually have to not do it to fit in.
Exactly, right. Most of them really are doing that healthy choice. We looked a little closer at marijuana because, as Kendall had said, we're trying to really pay close attention to what's happening at the state with as marijuana had become legalized, and over the as we've been doing the survey. So we do know that we saw our marijuana rates have ticked up a little bit, and in the context of things that's actually not so surprising. Marijuana is more accessible, unfortunately, to people in general, which means also to young people. And we know that about a third of our students have experimented with marijuana in their life. What's concerning here is that of those students, 2/3 of them have used edible products, and just over half have used things like dabs, oils, shatter, and wax. And so for people at home who don't know what those things are, they're very high potency, sort of manufactured marijuana products that have a lot of THC in them, which is the thing that actually gets people high. So, we're not going to get into it on this show, but there is a lot of research about sort of the links between THC, the developing adolescent brain. So those products are even more, marijuana, not safe in general for young people, but some of these high potency products carry even more concern. So, we're paying attention to that, and we need to do some work as a community around some of that as well.
And then on the bottom there, you have the perception about how their friends would feel if they use marijuana. And so I think that's another thing, is that our perception of marijuana as harmful is dropping.
Yes.
And so I remember on this survey, we saw a little bit less people reporting that they chose not to use marijuana because it was bad for their health. So it makes it that much more important for the other reasons that people choose not to use, like their parents would be disappointed in them. That's the number one reason that people don't use. Being worried about consequences or their future plans, those are all still really important reasons. And being able to communicate the negative health impacts of marijuana is so important too, because I'm pretty sure it's not good for your health.
Right, it is not.
Unless it is medically necessary.
Research is out, yeah.
So it's important, I think, to still communicate that, because that is a misperception that seems to be growing, that it's not very harmful to your health.
Yep. We also, we ask so many questions on this survey, which of course we're not going to be able to cover today. But we do also look at, where are students accessing alcohol and other drugs, and not really a surprise, but the most popular source for students to access alcohol is at a party. So social sources. The most popular source for marijuana among those who use is an underage friend. And the most popular source for electronic cigarettes, Juuls, those things are that they borrowed them from somebody else, which was a little surprising to us because we have seen, unfortunately, a fair number of devices confiscated. But students are borrowing them, which is also probably not good for their health for other reasons in cold and flu season. But we know that one of the other top sources for these products is convenience stores, and we did some policy work in Stoughton recently around that as well to make it less visible for students and not possible for kids to be able to purchase at convenience stores. So that we are looking at these things, and we're using this data to make policy decisions, which is, I think, one of the really strong pieces to our use of this data. So we also look at students' attitudes, right, and beliefs about some of these things, and Kendall had alluded to this. So we look at how harmful they think certain drugs are, and so this slide's kind of interesting when you look at sort of the drugs in relation to each other also. And so that blue bar is students who think that there is slightly to no risk to things. So you can look at either end of the chart. You can look at kids who believe things carry great or moderate risk, where it's red and orange, or you can look at the blue side and think about what things do they think are less harmful. As we said, marijuana, they believe is less harmful than most other things. But still, in most cases, a lot of them think a lot of these things do carry harm or are risky for them to do. Doesn't always line up with their behaviors, but there is a relationship between students who perceive things are harmful and use. And we also look at what they perceive that their parents believe. So this really actually has to do with, in some ways, how well parents are communicating what they think, because your child can't read your mind. So, this is why it's really important to often and repeatedly tell them your feelings about to be really clear about if you think it would be wrong and that there would be consequences for them to use alcohol and other drugs. But this is also, again, it's interesting just to look at their student perception, and this may or may not, this is their belief about what their parents think. It may or not actually be what their parents think. Because there's a communication piece here. But we do know that there is a relationship between a student believing that their parents would think it would be wrong for them to use, like, say, alcohol, and their actual alcohol use. They're less likely to use alcohol in our survey if they reported that they felt that their parents believed it would be wrong for them to do so. Right? Did I get that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. People's their perception of what their parents feel and not wanting to disappoint your parents is actually one of the biggest driving factors in healthy behavior. So
it's really important for parents to know communicating those things to your kid, even though it can be hard, is really important. And if you need resources for that, we actually have some on our website as well as at the Youth Commission. So we want to help you to be able to do that and to communicate that well. So we're going to we have like 4 minutes. We're going to zing through some other health behaviors really fast. And we're not going to get to everything, but we look at bullying, and this is the middle school data. So, the blue bar is what's actually happening. We asked them about their perceptions here as well, which is fascinating. Most kids are not bullied. Most kids are not bullies. But middle school students think that the behaviors are happening way more frequently than they do. So again, something we want to, talk to our students about, we don't have a culture of bullying. Of course, those rates, we would love for them to be lower. And actually, as they get older, the rates do go down. I think high school students, have a better understanding for what the term bullying means. That's a complicated survey question.
Yeah, we do explain what bullying is, but it's a lot of words to read.
Right, yeah. So there is a legal definition for bullying. I think oftentimes we lump a lot of mean behaviors into bullying. But, I think especially as kids get into high school, they can also identify that a little bit more clearly. And that's part of the reason I think we see the rates go down, is because they're correctly identifying what's bullying, what's not bullying.
Right.
So let's see. We looked at mental health a little bit. We have this very long, you actually see it on the slide. This is the standard question. During the past 12 months, did you ever feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more that you stopped doing some of the usual activities? We looked at our data from 2019 in comparison with the most recent state data, which was 2017. There is some concern here, and some stuff that we want to be thinking about as a community. How do we talk to students about depression? Are they correctly identifying it? We have had some tragedy in our community, certainly in the last year, and so we know that probably is having an impact. We have really great resources, I think, at the schools. I know the schools have been doing a lot of work on this issue, and we're fortunate we have a youth commission in our community that also, for students who need additional support and help, free services for families and their students. So if that's something, if you find yourself concerned about your student, if you're not sure if their behavior is sort of in the normal range of adolescent angst, certainly call the Youth Commission and talk to one of our social workers, and they'd be happy to think that through with you or evaluate your student, something we want to be paying attention to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these numbers see a lot of fluctuation from year to year, and I don't really know why, but I think it's great the more we have dialogue about it, and we've certainly had a lot of dialogue about it, I think, in the town in the past year or two. The more accurate data you get, and even if that means our numbers look a little higher than we're comfortable with, then we can do something about it.
Right. So the data, we believe, is that sort of is power for us. All right, we can quickly, I think we can zing through 2 more slides and we'll sort of close out. So in terms of driving behaviors and sort of this sort of safety behavior, most of our students, particularly those who are driving, are making really good choices most of the time. In fact, a third of our students report that they drove while texting, which of course is concerning to us, but what's interesting is more of them ride with somebody who was doing that behavior. And I think particularly, you don't see the middle school data here, but it looks pretty similar in terms of people they ride with. And we know a lot of times those are adults. So we need to all remember, all of us, that the behaviors that we do in the car, we are modeling for our younger siblings and students. The same is true of seatbelt use. We really want our kids to be always wearing their seatbelt, and in Massachusetts, actually, most adults wear their seatbelts all the time, and we need to make sure that we are modeling that for our young people, because that is the best prevention, is sort of modeling those good behaviors, not driving under the influence, not texting and driving or being distracted, wearing your seatbelt. That's our best prevention. So I'm watching the clock tick down, and I know Kendall and I could talk about data forever, but in order to to close out our show, I'm gonna. We're getting the alarm. I'm going to say thank you to Kendall. And
thank you.
Yeah, and if people have questions or you want to know more, please reach out to me at the Youth Commission. You can find us on Facebook or on the web. I'm happy to answer any questions. Kendall is always really gracious about crunching other data and looking at relationships between variables for us. And
we got more to come.
We got lots more to come. And she's right here in Stoughton, so we know where to find her when we want to learn more. So please be in touch, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.